day everyone, I am happy to welcome you all in this virtual gallery walk. Starting with this picture, which represents the birth, family, and ancestry of Dr. Jose Rizal. On June 19, 1861, Jose Rizal was born in Calamba, Laguna. During Rizal's time, Calamba was a thriving town devoted to sugar production. It fueled the young Rizal's intellectual and artistic genius. Rizal absorbed the early principles of love, affection, and loyalty in this environment, which grew into his senior years and earned him the acclaim and adoration of his people. Jose Rizal was the seventh of the 11 children of Don Francisco Ingracio Rizal, Mercado y Alejandro, and Doña Teodora Morales Alonzo y Realonda. Saturnina was the eldest child, followed by Pasiano, Narcisa, Olympia, Lucia, Maria, Jose, Concepcion, Josefa, Trinidad, and Soledad. Pepe, or Jose Rizal as referred to him by his family, was baptized in a neighboring church on June 22, 1861, when he was just 3 years old. Reverend Father Rufino Colantes baptized him, and Reverend Father Pedro Cansas was his godfather. According to Jose's own account of his childhood, he was raised in a condition that would be considered fortunate in today's Philippines. His forefathers, on both his matrilineal and patrilineal branches, had been persons of substance and importance above average of their times. The Alonzos and Mercados were far closer to their field hands than subsequent absentee landlords. They were ilustrados, which meant that they could read, write, and draw, even occasionally travel abroad. They were of the Principalía, which meant that they could vote for the town mayor, that they could collect taxes, that they had preference in town church and town hall, in civic and religious procession, and that they could wear European jacket or wield fork and spoon on special occasions. Both of Rizal's parents had a significant effect on him and left an imprint on his character. His father instilled in him a great sense of dignity and respect, as well as seriousness and self-possession, while his mother instilled in him the temperament of a poet and a dreamer, as well as the fortitude of sacrifice.
This picture symbolizes Pepe's early childhood. This is the story of the moth which his mother shared when he was young. Surprisingly, his impression with the story was a prophetic of a martyr faith, for he envied the insect which died for the sake of the light. Likely, Jose had a few recollections of his childhood, which suggests that it was a happy memory. In the evenings, he would be taken for walks along the river or listen to the fairy stories of Aya, his nanny, as they sat in the moonlight on the azotea after saying the rosary. When he was old enough, Leon Monroy, who lodged with the family, gave Jose a lesson in reading, writing, and rudiments of Latin. Uncle Manuel developed his physic, while Uncle Gregorio taught him the rapidity in work, to think for himself, and to observe carefully and picture what he saw. Early in life, he had already seen the injustices and abuses daily in Calamba that attracted his attention. Young Jose also spent much of his time in the church. Oftentimes, he also enjoyed playing alone and watching different birds singing, such as Kulyawan, Maya, and Pipit. He was also good in magic tricks, performing magic lantern exhibitions, disappearing a coin, false cutting a thin rope, and untying a handkerchief. Jose's early childhood he considered to be his happiest moment, his trip with his father in Antipolo to fulfill his mother's vow to do a pilgrimage to the Virgin of Antipolo. At the age of 4, he lost his little sister Concepcion. Her death caused so much sorrow to him and his family, as his sister was very close to him. He also had the soul of an artist, yearning for an expression. When he was 5 years old, he began to draw with pencil and to mold with clay and wax.
Rizal and Ateneo. In 1872, Rizal was sent by his parents to study in Manila, and so he did. He entered Ateneo Municipal as what usually happens. Rizal was discriminated by his classmates and professors, mainly because he had only a little knowledge about Spain and also the fact that he was from Calamba, Laguna. He was also a late enrollee, so that added up the situation. But in spite of the negative things happened to him, he also experienced good things. The Jesuits taught them about educational system like discipline, character, building, and religious instruction. Because of that, he learned about the real value of education in a person's life, and of course to be strong despite of all the people who were trying to pull him down. He also went to his Spanishization, which made him a kind of a better Spanish than using his own language, Filipino. He wrote to the Filipino youth in his poem. He enlightened the readers about the truth which Filipinos must be standing and being proud of what they are, and not just slave of somebody else. And he also mentioned a famous quote that the youth is the hope of our nation. And lastly, he ended with a thanksgiving of God and praise to our country youth by saying that wherever he may be going, he would always be a proud of the Filipino youth. Aside from the poem, he wrote the intimate alliance between religion and education.
This picture signifies years of Rizal in UST. In 1877, Jose Rizal, one of our very own national heroes in the Philippines, enrolled in the University of Santo Tomas. Jose Rizal studied at the university with a degree in medicine and philosophy and letters. He pursued these degrees for two reasons. It was exactly what his father would have wanted for him, and he had ignored the advice of the Ateneo's rector, Father Ramon Pablo. Jose Rizal's marks in the philosophy and letters course were outstanding, with an excellent rating in every unit. However, when it came to the medicine course, his marks were only fair and good, compared to the excellent grades he received in all of his subjects at Ateneo. One of the reasons Rizal pursued the medicine degree was because his mother's eyesight was fading, and he felt he owed it to her to become a doctor and heal her condition. Jose Rizal encountered his first experience of Spanish brutality during his first year as a freshman in UST. Due to the darkness, he failed to recognize a Guardia Civil officer who he has passed by. As a result, the officer turned to Rizal and slashed his sword at him. Rizal reported the incidents, but he was ignored because he was an Indio. When we say Indio, it is the term used by the Spaniards to refer to the poor people of our country who could be slaves and peasants only. At that time, Rizal still had time for love. When he was a student at UST in 1879, Rizal was temporarily living in a boarding house in Intramuros, where he met a lovely young lady named Leonor Rivera, the daughter of his uncle Antonio Rivera. After all, Rizal and Leonor were in a relationship that they kept hidden from their parents and friends. In 1879, there was a competition which was held by Liceo Artistico Literario. The poem written by Rizal for the competition, which also won, is A la Juventud Filipina, or To the Filipino Youth. It is a poem written in Spanish. It states that Filipino youth are capable of reaching great heights. It encourages Filipino youth to realize their full potential by utilizing their skills and talents for the benefit of our countrymen. Unfortunately, Rizal was disappointed at the University of Santo Tomas, which also reflected in his academics, for the reason that he was hated by the Dominican professors, and his fellow Filipino students suffered discrimination, and the teaching technique at the University of Santo Tomas was antiquated and repressive. Lastly, Rizal hated Dominican professors who were rude and biased against his Filipino colleagues, who simply remained silent after being insulted. And that's all. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Rosemary C. Sumbilon and today I am going to discuss about Jose Rizal's education in Europe. This shows Jose Rizal's education and trip to Europe. On May 5, 1882, Rizal take off to Singapore then journeyed by French mailboat through the Suez Canal to Marseilles and to Barcelona. From Barcelona, he quickly went to Madrid to continue his course in philosophy and letters and in medicine. Learned and studied foreign languages such as Latin, Greek, French, English, Italian, and also mastered Catalan, Arabic, German, Sanskrit, and Hebrew, which helped him to communicate to people with different languages easily. In 1884, Rizal received a degree in licentiate in medicine and a degree in philosophy and letters at the University of Madrid. He worked and visited foremost countries in Europe, studied their institutions, learned the secrets of their progress, and carried information to his countrymen that might spare them from the bondage of subjugation. From Madrid, he went to Paris and became a clinical assistant to Dr. Louis D. Record, worked with several of the best ophthalmologists and renowned personalities in Europe. From Heidelberg, he went to Leipzig, studied psychology, and became interested in the comparison of race characteristics as influenced by environment, history, and language. From Leipzig to Berlin, he settled himself to complete his novel while studying anthropology and ethnology, and through his association with Rudolf Virchow, his views with regards to democracy had widened and enlightened. To be free, he thought, a person must know how to use freedom. The fall of 1885, Rizal studied arts, visiting various museums, and he started the composition of the story of the Philippine life. He wrote there the opening chapters of the Noli Me Tangere and carried them to Heidelberg. On February 22, 1887, Noli Me Tangere was printed and bound to launch 2,000 copies. After that, Dr. Jose Rizal went to Dresden and was detained by the Museum of Dresden for how many weeks. He also went to Leitmeritz and began an intimate and close friendship with Dr. Ferdinand Blumentritt. He also went to Vienna and became close to Nordenfels, an Australian novelist, and also met some men who are prominent in literature and art. He went to Italy, received some researches and observations in many countries, and concluded that it's time to return to his country, which is the Philippines. From Rome, he sped to Marseilles, took a steamer on July 3, 1887 for Saigon and transshipped to Manila. And August 15, after a lot of travels, he saw once more the Philippines after 5 years.
In this section, we will talk about Dr. Jose Rizal homecoming. During Rizal's absence, the city had not changed significantly. His first surgery in the Philippines restored his mother's sight by removing the double cataract, completing the goal of his specific study in Paris. This and other such accomplishments earned in the young oculist a reputation that drew patients from all over Luzon, and despite his modest fees, he amassed over 5,000 during his 7-month stay in the islands. In addition to some diamonds he had purchased as a secure method of transporting monies. Because the Governor-General of the Philippines, General Emilio Terrero, was concerned that Rizal might be assaulted by certain people, he provided him with a bodyguard in the form of Jose Tabiel de Andrade, a young Spanish officer, and they became quick friends since they shared creative and interests. The Spanish ambassador to Manila advised Rizal to leave the Philippines, but he was reluctant because his private life had been darkened by his love affair. He came home to find Leonor Rivera married and found her husband already had a new wife. After completing the last chapter of Noli Me Tangere, he felt a strong urge to write a sequel but could not hope to accomplish it at home. He planned to go back to Europe by way of United States, where he intended to smuggle out the manuscript. In the Philippines, Rizal family faced a greater problem with their land. The Rizal family property was lost for around 150,000 pesos, and General Wilo dispatched a soldier to Calamba, and two plaintiffs were instructed to remove their belongings and the sugar mills, for a promise of land for a colony thanks to the power of European recommendation, particularly those of his friend in London, Dr. Ruth, publisher of Rubner's Monthly. Meanwhile, he worked as a doctor in Hong Kong and wrote for the Hong Kong Telegraph. Rizal was joined by his sister Lucia when he arrived in Manila. In Basa's home, she had gathered 5 copies of his proclamation to publish flyless in her home. Rizal and his sister arrived safely and he immediately rushed to the Orient Hotel, and he was the honored guest at a luncheon hosted by a master and wardens of the Filipino lodges in Manila.
The arrival of Jose Rizal in Manila in 1892 has become very sensational among the Filipinos. His popularity feared the Spaniards and such paid careful attention to his every move. On July 3, 1892, he founded the La Liga Filipina in Tondo, Manila. Jose Rizal was arrested 4 days later for publishing anti-Catholic books and articles. He dedicates his novel to the 3 traitors, Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora. Aboard the steamer Cebu and Heavy Guard, Rizal left Manila, sailing to Mindoro and Panay, until he reached the Pitan at 7 o'clock in the evening of June 17. From that day until July 31, 1896, the Pitan became the bear witness to one of the most fruitful years in Rizal's life. His stay in the province was more than his living in the exile. It was the period when Rizal had been more focused on serving the people and the society through civic works, medical practices, land development, and promotion of education. In the Pitan, Rizal had a scholarly debate with Father Pablo Pastels regarding religion. This exchange of heated arguments revealed the anti-Christian Rizal, his bitterness on the abuses performed by friars doing such under the name of the sacred religion. Father Pastels tried his best to win Rizal back to the faith, but fortunately or unfortunately in vain. This series of debates ended conclusively, in which neither of them convinced the other of his judgments or arguments. At the end of his stay in the Pitan, Rizal had maximized his time by devoting much of it to improving his artistic and literary skills, doing agricultural and civic projects, engaging in business activities, and writing letters to friends in Europe. Jose Rizal lived in exile in the Pitan, a remote town in Mindanao that was under the missionary jurisdiction of the Jesuits. From 1892 to 1896, after almost a week, on August 6, 1896, España arrived in Manila. He was transferred to the cruiser Castilla to wait for the next mail boat that would sail for Spain next month. This 4 years interregnum in his life was tediously unexciting but was abundantly fruitful with varied achievements. July 17, 1992 marks the centenary of the exile to the Pitan of our national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal. Jose Rizal to the people of the Pitan should always be remembered and emulated by the present and future generations.
On the early morning of December 29, 1896, Rizal was informed that he was to be executed on the very next day. The declaration of the court's verdict of execution spread fast, and the tension rose in Manila as the Spaniards suspect that the rebels will arrive at the city to liberate Rizal. This verdict came over after a one-day trial presided over by Colonel Jose Tagores Arjona and the military court, and also by Enrique de Alcocera, the advocate auxiliary general, was the prosecutor. Jose Rizal was condemned for promoting and inciting rebellion, as well as founding illegal association with the rebels. He was defended by Lieutenant Luis Tavel de Andrade, his bodyguard's brother in Calamba, 1887 to 1888. It was stated in the preliminary investigations that he was made to classify who were the rebels from the list of 27 names, and was interrogated without the benefit of counsel, meaning that he was put on the spot and was forced to make a rapid identification from the said list of names. Characters whom he did not see or voices he haven't heard from, but those words would still be used to convict him. Rizal was then to stand trial at the military court. During the trial, the charges against Jose Rizal Mercado were that he was the primary organizer and the soul of the insurrection of the Philippines, a founder of societies, books, as well as seditious and rebellious ideas, and the leader of filibusterism in the country. The defendant, Tavel de Andrade, appealed to the judges that the accused should not be condemned with the bias and prejudice of the insurrection, and should be given verdict via technicality of the law, based on evidence from witnesses, confessions of the accused, and solid testimony. Although the argument of the defendant was futile in a hostile courtroom, Rizal was still given permission to speak in his defense, in which he tried to convince the court of his innocence about the rebellion. To conclude, Rizal already knew that he faced certain death, but he still needed to take a last stand in the name of justice, that he only wanted the sentiments and the sentiments of the people to be heard. Rizal was brought back to his cell to await the verdict. On the next day, Sunday, the governor's approval and the order for Rizal's execution was to be held on Monday.
Hello everyone, today I'll be discussing about Rizal's last few days. December 11, 1896. Rizal was charged with chief organizer and living soul of the Filipino insurgency, the originator of societies, publications, and books dedicated to fomenting and promoting the principles of revolt in his prison cell. 13th of December, as Governor General of the Philippines, Ramon Blanco was replaced by Camilo de Polavea, a more harsh figure. Dominguez delivered the Rizal case papers to the Malacanang Palace. 15th of December, Rizal addressed his manifesto to a group of Filipinos, urging them to put an end to the absurd revolt and struggle for freedom, with education as a precondition. The manifesto was suppressed by the government. On the 25th of December, Rizal saddest Christmas, away from family and friends. On the 26th of December, around 8 a.m., the Cuartel de Espa, Rizal's trial began. On the same day, the court-martial secretly and anonymously decided to convict him and sentence him to death by firing squad. On 28th of December, Polavea signs the death verdict. On the next day, around 6 a.m., Captain Rafael Dominguez read Rizal's sentence to be shot the next day at 7 a.m. at Luneta de Bagumbayan, which is known as the Rizal Park. At 7 a.m., Rizal was moved to a chapel cell with religious images to persuade him to return to the Catholic faith. Fathers Miguel Sadera Mata and Luis Viza, both Jesuit priests, were his first visitors. Around 7:15 a.m., after Father Sadera left, Rizal asked Father Viza for the Sacred Heart statue, which he carved when he was an Ateneo student. From his pocket of statuette appears. Around 8 a.m., Father Viza, relieved by Father Antonio Rosel, who joined Rizal for breakfast. Lieutenant Luis Taviel de Andrade joins them. At 9 a.m., Father Federico Faura appeared claiming that Rizal would lose his head if he wrote the Noli Me Tangere. Father, you are indefinitely a prophet, Rizal told him. On 29th of December, around 10 a.m., Fathers Jose Villaclara and Estanislao March paid a visit to Rizal, followed by Santiago Matais of El Heraldo de Madrid, a Spanish journalist, for an interview. Around 12 to 3 p.m., Rizal's time in prison was spent alone. He ate lunch, wrote letters, and most likely wrote his final poem, a 14-stanza poem written in his flowing handwriting on a scrap of paper. He stowed it away in his alcohol stove. Mi Ultimo Adios was the name given to the untitled poem later on, My Last Farewell. He had already commended the rebels on the battlefield for offering their life, without doubt, without sadness, in the second stanza. On the next day, 30th of December, around 7 a.m., at Luneta, Manila, the 35-year-old patriot was shot in the back by a firing squad. He hesitated, turned halfway around to face his executioners, and fell on his back to the face of the Philippine sun.
The execution and the burial, and this image symbolizes it.
On the day of the execution, December 30, 1896, Rizal was brought out of Fort Santiago to the execution place, Luneta de Bagumbayan. A burglar and a drummer ushered him, and he was entirely clothed in black. His arms were tied, and he was flanked by Father Villa Clara, Stanislao March, and Taviel de Andrade. A permissible 8-man firing squad of the Filipino Army was Rizal's executioners. He was presented with a crucifix to kiss prior to his compelled course of fate. He was then checked by an army doctor, resulting in normal findings. He wished to be taken in the front, for he argued that he is not a traitor and for his head to be pardoned. But the primary request was refused. The orders were fired, and springs of bullets pierced Rizal's body. Following the execution, the martyr's remains were carried to San Juan de Dios Hospital and were concealed in the Pacos Cemetery with bare remains and unmarked grave. Narcisa, the hero's older sister, searched for his grave and eventually found it in Pacos Cemetery. She marked the grave with Rizal's initials in reverse. After 2 years, his remains were disclosed and returned to his family in Binondo.
In summary, he is Jose Rizal, born on June 19, 1861 in Calamba, Laguna. His parents are Don Francisco and Doña Chedora. He has 10 siblings and they come from a multiracial ancestry. Likely, Jose had a few recollections of his childhood which suggest that it was a happy memory, such as nocturnal walk with his black dog named Osman. In Ateneo years, despite the discrimination, he learned about the real value of education in a person's life, and of course, to be strong despite all the people who were trying to pull him down. His exile, the arrival became very sensational among the Filipinos. His popularity feared the Spaniards, and such paid careful attention to his every move. On July 17, 1992, marks the centenary of the exile to Lapitan of our national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal. His trial. On the early morning of December 29, 1896, Rizal was informed that he was to be executed at sunrise of the very next day. On December 29, 1896, Jose Rizal Mercado was sentenced to death by a military court in Manila. His last few days, he is believed to have written his final poem, Mi Ultimo Adios, My Last Farewell, during his time in prison. The poem is a 14 stanza written in his flowing handwriting on a scrap of paper. Lastly, the execution in Burial. An 8-man firing squad of the Filipino Army was his executioners. The martyrs remained